Hey everyone, welcome back to another lesson. So in this one, we're going to do a really fun practice, and like the previous practices that we've done, this one's going to be a bit of a more complicated one. So we're going to cut it into multiple, parts essentially, and we're going to get it done. So this is actually a really cool one. As I've shown you before, this is an encryption tool and really simple one, but like a very interesting way to practice our skills so far, especially the indexes and like functions with inputs and things like that. So with that being said, let me actually show you one more time though how this program works. When we run it, obviously there's a bunch of stuff here, and then we're gonna say, for example, encrypt. Okay, so we're gonna say, well, encode actually, and we're gonna, for example, type something. I'm just gonna say Sean and give it a shift number, and let's say 10, and it's gonna just give me a encrypted result. Now what you want to do, this essentially is what we're gonna get. This is the encrypted message, and for anyone who wants to decrypt this, what you're gonna do is you're just gonna take this message. Let's actually go again. I'm just gonna say yes. We're gonna say decode, and if we decode it and type our message, and we're gonna say how many shifts, as always, like before, I'm just gonna say 10, and there you go. So it's going to decrypt it back to Sean. See, so this is the idea. Again, the idea is to send this encrypted message to someone, and then have the same person know the shift number essentially, and when that happens, you can actually communicate by hiding the message like this. So again, it's a pretty simple cipher system, and I will explain what exactly this thing does. All right, so let me actually just quickly explain it to you. So let's clear this. So the idea with this is that, for example, when you have a list of characters, let's say A, B, C, D, okay, imagine the entire alphabet. What you can do with this is that you actually can shift the position of a letter in order to encrypt it. And if you and also the person you're sending the message know exactly what is the shift number, you could send an encrypted message to someone. So the idea is that, for example, if you have let's say a list of letters A, B, C, D, and we want to encrypt this, if, for example, this person knows that you're shifting the letters by 1, A becomes B, right? And B becomes C, C becomes D. So that is the shift number we're talking about. Essentially, we're shifting the letter forward based on that number. So when we said in that particular practice problem that we just did, we shifted the letter by 10. What we did was that we shifted every letter in that name or in that message by 10. For example, if there was an S, we went 10 characters forward in an alphabetic order. So again, that's basically the idea of it. So for example, if I put again, let's do encode. All right, so I'm just gonna put A. Let's see what comes out. Let's say if I do 2, take a look, it throws out C. Essentially, A shifted by 2 is going to be B, C. So that is the idea with this encryption system. So again, it's a pretty simple one, but again, it's going to help us to practice a lot of basic concepts that we've talked about, especially defining functions and function values and inputs and stuff like that. All right. So as always, the resources section is going to include the starter file. You can actually access it, and in the starter file, you have also a few things. For example, we got the alphabet, okay, and if you actually pay attention, one of the things is that the alphabet is already included, because I just want to make your life easier, but also the alphabet is repeated twice. So if you take a look, we got Z here, and then A, B, C, D starts again. Now the idea is that we're trying to solve a bug here. So one of the things that can happen when you run something like this is that if you you have a letter or a word that have Z, for example, in it, obviously Z is the end of the letter, right? So that means that you're not going to be able to shift forward because you are at the end of that list essentially. right? So what do you exactly do about that? And this is where this whole thing comes from. The idea is that when you actually do use the index method to go through a list, what happens is that it's going to find the first instance of like that particular example. For example, if you're indexing F, it's going to find the first F, not the second one. So this idea of repeating it twice is going to give you a buffer, so you're going to prevent bugs. Now, at the end, one of the things I want to do when we design this whole thing and build it, one of the things I will do is that I will talk about a strategy. It's a much more complicated and not complicated, but advanced way to actually go about this, so you don't have to deal with the characters, and if someone enters like 1,000, you don't have to like, you know, go like repeat this 1,000 times or something. But yeah, we'll talk about that later. We're just going to do it very simple. So, you know, the starter file includes the alphabet, and it's going to include the you know, inputs. So the first one is the direction. That's the first thing you see when you actually open it. This says encode to encrypt and decode to decrypt. You know, we're not going to touch this right now. This is something that we're going to kind of work with later on. But like, you know, then we're going to have the text, type your message. That's the encryption message, and message, or like the words they want to encrypt. And then we're going to have the shift number, like basically how many they want to shift it through the alphabet. And this is basically what we're doing, right? And here's the tasks that you need to do. First, you need to create a function called encrypt that takes plain text and shift amount, right? So again, these are like the actual numbers, like the things that user is entering, right? Plain text and shift amount. So like, obviously, let's actually change this. Here we go. All right. So just like that, you know, we have that. That would be our first encrypt, like our first function. And then inside the encrypt function, shift each letter of the text afterwards forwards in the alphabet by the shift amount and print the encrypted text. Now the way you do this is, again, as I said, you use the for loop, because again, you're working with a list. So think about how you can do this. You need to get in each individual letter of that plain text and then shift it, and then obviously, you know, move forward with it. So again, just think about how you can do this. It's not going to be that complicated when you actually, if you remember all the stuff that we talked about so far, especially like, you know, moving within the list, for example, the indexing, the way it works, it starts from 0 and all that. So take some time, think about this problem. And also, again, number 3 is pretty simple, call the encrypt function and add the user values. So again, pretty simple stuff. But think about how you can do this, and I'm going to just pause the video and see if you can do it by yourself. Alright everyone, so hopefully you try to actually solve this problem, but either way, let's go ahead and start building this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to define our function. So again, the first step, if you remember, the task 1 is to create a function called encrypt. So I'm just going to define a function, name it encrypt, and then we're going to enter our parameters, which is one is going to be plain text. Just going to copy it from here to make my life easier. Okay, plain text and shift amount. Perfect. So we got our function. So let's go ahead and actually build it up. So the first thing we're going to do is actually, one of the things that we have done in the past, if you remember, is that we, like, you know, when we wanted to count, like in the previous lesson, in practices where we were counting the lives, you know, of the game that we built, we would like actually start with a value, an integer, and we would take 1 out of it or add 1 to it based on the game or how people would respond. And we're going to kind of do the same thing here, but with the twist. And the twist is that we're going to use define a brand new variable, and we're going to have an empty value in it. The idea with this empty value is that later on, when we actually get the encrypted text, we're going to store this inside, store that text inside this variable later on. So we're just going to define it for now as empty, and then we're just going to add it later. So we're just going to call it cipher text, and we're going to say equal, and it's going to be an empty value, nothing else for now. All right. So next step is we're going to do the for loop. Now remember, we're working with a list here, so we're going to loop through each letter in the text. All right. So the plain text is what we're going to get from the user, so we're going to loop through each letter. So we're going to say for letter in plain text. All right, and that's our first. And then the next step is to get the position. So what we're going to do is we're going to define a new variable, call this position, and equals. Now this is where things get interesting. So what we want to do is we want to get the index of letter in the alphabet. So we want to understand where is the position, or basically where each letter of this thing that user is entering in the alphabet, right? So in here. So in order to do this, we're going to use the index method, right? So we're going to say alphabet, and we're going to do index, and we're going to find it based on the letter. Here we go. So just like that, what we're doing here is that we're going to get the index of the letter in the alphabet. So very simple. This is going to be basically a number, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to now that we have the position, now that we have the number of each letter, what we're going to do is we're going to use the shift amount that we received from the user to actually shift it, move it essentially, right? So I'm just going to define a new function, call it new position. And what we're going to do is we're going to say equals position plus shift amount. Here we go. So just like that, we define the new position of this, right? So shift the value index by the shift amount, basically whatever the user entered. Now that we have the shift amount, the new position, now what we're gonna do, now this is gonna be a number again, this is gonna be integer, right? So now we're gonna go back to the list and figure out what is this new position, or this like new entry, basically based on the new position that we just came up with, all right? So let's actually do that. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna say, define a new variable, call it new letter, and we're going to say that is going to equal alphabet, and we're going to just copy this new position essentially. Oh, there you go. So essentially what we're doing is that we're going to find the new letter, and we're going to take this alphabet, and you know, we're going to say, okay, so let's show me this new position that we just generated here, using inside this alphabet list essentially. So that's what we just did, and just like that, we're pretty much almost done. So now we're going to actually generate the ciphertext. So I'm just going to call the ciphertext that we have. We're going to say plus equals new letter. So just like that, we finished it. Now what we're going to do is let's actually print this. All right, so let's print it real quick. I'm going to print it on the same level as the 4. So we're going to print, and we're going to use an F string. All right, so the encoded message is ciphertext. Perfect. So now we actually print the text message. Now the text, encrypted text. Now we actually have our function. The function is done, but this is not going to do anything, right? So we defined our function. It's not going to do anything. Now it's time to actually call it. And if you remember, the way you actually call a function is by just calling it. So I'm just going to say encrypt, and we're going to say plain, let's do this, plain text, and this is going to equal the text that user is going to enter, which is right here, and shift amount, shift amount is going to equal shift. Now this is nowhere near done yet, but this is just the first step. Now if you run this, we should be able to get an encrypted message. All right, so the first message that says encode or decode, it's not going to matter because this functionality is not actually enabled yet. So if you just enter, it's going to go through the next step. So it's going to type your message. I'm going to say Sean, and it's going to say shift number, let's say 5, and the encoded message is this. Here we go. So the first step is done. Essentially, we created the encoder, and now we're going to actually do the next steps. But keep in mind, guys, I just want to explain one more time because I know this can get a little bit confusing. But what we did here is that we, first of all, started by defining a function, right? And we gave it a few parameters, right? The plain text and the shift amount. All right. And then what we did is that we defined an empty variable which is going to later on hold the encrypted message, right? So pretty much very simple, just a variable and an empty string essentially, right? And then what we did was that we looped through each letter in the text. So we used for loop because we're working with the tag with a list, right? For loop, and in plain text. So that's going to be basically the variable that we defined here, right? So the plain text, essentially that's that. So that's what user is going to enter, and then we're going to say here, right here, we're going to say this position is going to equal alphabet index letter. So the idea with this is that this is essentially going to get the index of letter in the alphabet. So we're going to get the position of each letter inside the alphabet list that we have here. So we're going to find where is it exactly, and then we're going to actually define a new position and get the old position and add the shift amount which user entered. And then we're going to based on, so now that we have the shift amount, the new position, right? Now that we have that, we're going to actually find a new letter based on that shift amount. All right. So new letter is going to be called alphabet, and this, index position, essentially, that's like the brackets, right? So that's going to be our new position. And then we're going to say ciphertext equals new letter. So that's basically how it's going to go. So there you go. So just like that, we pretty much encrypted all of that and shifted it in the alphabet. So guys, let me know if you have any questions. I know this can get a little bit confusing, but if you think about it, it's not going to be that hard. I'm actually going to do one thing. I'm going to start adding comments to the completed to the completed solution. You can, again, as always, you can fork it for yourself by going to the resources section. So I'm gonna just add some comments to this, so this way you understand it better and you understand exactly what's going on, so you can take a look at it and see it for yourself. Let me know if you have any questions. If not, I'll see you in the next step.